The Lost World, written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. From the Dominoes series by Oxford University Press, Stage 2. Series editors Bill Bowler and Sue Parmenter. Text adaptation by Susan Kingsley, illustrated by Anders Westerberg. Chapter 7. We must move and move quickly. The next morning, I felt somebody touch my arm, and my hand went to my gun. Then I opened my eyes, and I saw Lord John on his knees at my side. His clothes were ragged and dirty. His thin face was scratched and bloody, and his eyes were wild. "Quick, young friend," he shouted. "Get the rifles! Get some food! Now run!" A minute later, Lord John and I were running through the forest with a rifle under each arm and our hands full of food. At last, he pulled me to the ground. "There," he said. "I think that we are safe here." "What's happened?" I asked. "Where are the professors?" "The ape men got us. It was early in the morning. They jumped out of the trees onto us. They look like animals, but they talk in a strange language and fight with sticks and stones. They are as big as men, but stronger." While Lord John was telling me this, he was looking quietly from left to right all the time, with his gun ready in his hand. "They took us to their town, dragging us along like animals," he said. "When we got there, they tied us up and kept us as prisoners. What about you?" I told him about my adventures in the night. "You say you saw caves?" he went on. "Well, we have seen the Indians who lived there. From what Challenger says, they have clearly found their way up from the forest floor to the plateau, much later than the ape men. They live on that side of the plateau. The ape men live on this side, and there's a bloody war between them. Yesterday, the ape men caught 12 of these Indians and brought them back as prisoners. Now, do you remember that forest of sharp bamboo sticks? Well, it's just under Ape Town, and that's the jumping off place for their prisoners. One by one, the line of Indians had to jump off the cliff while everyone watched. The bamboo went through those poor men like knives. It was horrible. Well, I was sure that we were next, but they decided to keep us together, 6 of the Indians, until today. I escaped this morning by kicking my guard in the stomach, and I ran back to the camp to get the rifles. Just then we heard strange noises coming near us. "Shh! Here they come." I looked through the trees and saw the ape men. They walked one behind the other with short legs, great round backs, and long arms which touched the ground. I took my gun. "No, not here," said Lord John. "We'll have better luck on open ground, where they can't run as fast as us. Let's wait a while." We had breakfast in our hiding place, then began our slow and careful walk through the forest. After about an hour, Lord John fell down behind some trees, pulling me down with him. "We are here. I hope that we are not too late," he said very quietly. I looked through the trees. I will never forget the sight which met my eyes. On open ground near the edge of the cliff, there were about 100 of the red, hairy ape men. In front of them stood a line of prisoners, 5 Indians and 2 white men, Challenger and Summerlee. Then the chief of the ape men held up his hand. 2 large ape men caught an Indian by his leg and arm and threw him over the edge of the cliff. The ape men then all ran to the edge and watched the poor Indian fall to a horrible death. They all laughed and screamed with joy, then waited for the next man. This time it was Summerlee. The 2 ape men pulled his tall, thin body to the edge of the cliff. Challenger turned to the chief, moving his arms about wildly. The chief pushed Challenger away and held up his hand, but then there was a loud crash from Lord John's rifle, and the chief fell to the ground. He was dead. "Shoot at them!" shouted Lord John. "Shoot, my boy! Shoot!" We shot and shot again and again. The ape-men ran around wildly. They could not understand where this deadly rain was falling from. Then all at once they left their prisoners and escaped into the trees. Challenger and I took poor Summer Lee and ran with him. Lord John ran behind us, shooting at the ape-men who were jumping down at us from the trees. They followed us screaming for more than a mile. Then the noise stopped, and we arrived at our camp. We saw that we were alone. But we were not alone for long. A minute later, there was a soft crying sound outside the wall of our camp. We looked out and saw the 4 Indians from the cliff's edge. They ran to us and threw themselves at Lord John's feet. "Get up, little men, get up," said Lord John. "Dear me, what can we do with these little fellows?" "We need to take them home, of course," said Challenger. Far away we heard the sound of ape-men's excited voices. "We must move, and move quickly," said Lord John. Half an hour later we were all at our hiding place in the forest. There we rested our tired bodies. We were sure that the ape-men would not find us there, and the Indians soon became less afraid. They were small, with soft red skin and friendly faces. One of them, a proud young man called Maritas, was clearly their chief. The next day we sent one of the Indians to get water, but he did not come back for a long time. I walked a little way into the forest to look for him, then saw something lying on the ground. It was the body of the Indian. I just had time to call my friends before 2 long hairy arms came down from the trees. 2 strong hands closed round my neck and pulled my neck back. I saw a pair of wild glassy eyes and a mouthful of long sharp teeth. The hands pulled harder on my neck. There was a ringing in my ear, and stars danced in front of my eyes. I heard the sound of a rifle, and then everything went black. When I woke, I was in our hiding place, and Lord John was giving me water. Challenger and Summer Lee stood behind him, looking worried. "We nearly lost you there, young friend," said Lord John. We now knew that the ape-men were all around us, watching our every move. Early that afternoon, we left our hiding place. The horrible cries of the ape-men rang in the trees behind us. Our fine young Indian chief walked in front. Next came the other 2 Indians. The last came 4 very tired, dirty, and untidy white men. We reached the lake in the late afternoon. It was a fine sight. 100 small boats were sailing across the lake's glassy water to meet us. The men in the boats shouted with joy when they saw their young chief. They arrived on the beach and threw themselves joyfully at his feet. Merita's father, the old chief, arrived wearing a beautiful animal skin. Meritus pointed at us and said a few words to his father. The chief shook our hands. Then all the Indians fell to our feet. I felt very uncomfortable at this, and I could see that Summer Lee and Lord John felt the same. But Challenger loved it. "Ah, yes," he said, looking down at them with a proud smile. "These people know an important man when they see one." It was clear that the Indians were ready for war. Each man had an arrow and a bamboo with a sharp bone at the end. They sat down in a circle and began to talk. "Well," said Lord John, "I'm going to go with our friends here and fight those ape-men. What about you?" I agreed at once. Challenger too was ready to fight. And in the end, even Summer Lee said that he would come with us. Early next morning, 400 or 500 Indians came together to meet their enemy. We walked at their sides with our guns ready. Early next morning, 400 or 500 Indians came together to meet their enemy. We walked at their sides with our guns ready. We did not need to wait long. There was a wild, high screaming, and suddenly the ape-men ran out from the trees. With sharp sticks and stones, They ran to the center of the Indian line, but with their large bodies and short legs, they could not move fast enough. Indian arrows shot them down one after the other. The fight then moved on into the trees. Here, the ape men were more dangerous. They hid in the trees, threw down sharp stones, and jumped down on us with their great heavy bodies. It was a long, hard, and bloody fight, but the Indians were cleverer and faster, and at last nearly all the ape men lay dead. The ape men who were still alive ran to the cliff edge. They looked back and saw that the Indians were following them, and with one long terrible scream, the last ape men jumped to their deaths. "This has been a great day in the story of this country," said Challenger. "The ape people of the old world have disappeared, and the plateau now belongs to the new world, the world of men." With this, we come to the end of chapter 7. Now, chapter 8, Up with Them. It was time for us to go home. The Indians were our friends, but they would not help us to leave. If we asked them, they just smiled and shook their heads. Only Meritus, the chief's son, looked at us sadly and showed that he felt sorry for us. So we made our camp beside the lake and tried to find a way to escape. The lake was a wonderful place. The scientists joyfully studied all the strange and beautiful animals which lived in and around its clear waters. I did not know exactly why, but Lon John was very interested in some soft blue earth at the lakeside. One day I met him wearing a strange, round cage made of bamboo. "Where are you going like that?" I asked him. "I'm going to see those petrodactyls. Interesting things, but not too friendly. That's why I'm wearing this." "I'm also going to get a baby for Challenger," he replied and walked away. Then, one evening, Meritus came to our camp and gave me a piece of tree bark. He pointed to the caves above me and put a finger to his mouth to show that this was a secret. Then he left. I took the bark to the firelight and we all looked at it. It had black lines on it, one next to the other. "What is it?" said Challenger. "Writing?" "I don't know," I said, "but I'm sure that it's something important." "I think I've got it," said Lon John. "How many lines are there?" 18. "And how many cave openings?" 18. "I believe that it's a map of the caves." He pointed up to the caves when he gave it to me. I said, "That's it then," said Lord John excitedly. "You see that cross here? That shows the cave which is deepest, one that goes through to the other side," I shouted. At once we went up the stone stairs to the cave mouths, being careful that nobody saw us. We found the cave, the second one from the left, and ran into it. We followed the empty tunnel round to the right, but then we met a wall of rock. It was the end of the tunnel. But then I looked at the bark again and I suddenly understood. The map showed a fork in the tunnel. "I've got it!" I shouted, running back. "Follow me!" I was right. A little way back there was a great black opening in the wall to our right. It was the lower arm of the tunnel. We ran down it and we suddenly saw a bright light at the end. It was the moon. "We are through, boys, we are through!" shouted Lon John. He looked through the hole and saw that we were perhaps 30 meters from the bottom of the cliffs. So we ran back to our camp to get ready for our escape. One large square box which belonged to Professor Challenger gave us some trouble, but our other things were light and easy to carry. The night we secretly left the camp and climbed quickly up the stone stairs. Just when we got to the entrance of the cave, we heard the strange sad cry of an animal on the lake. Was it the voice of Maple Whiteland saying goodbye? We turned and went into the dark cave. We soon arrived at the other end of the tunnel. Then, with the help of our 50-meter rope, we climbed down off the cliffs. In the early morning, we were at Zambo's camp, and a few weeks later, we were on a ship sailing home to England. Our news went before us, and a large crowd of reporters met our ship when it arrived, but we did not say a word to them. We were saving our story for the meeting at the Zoological Institute the next evening. The meeting was at 8 o'clock. The great room was full long before that time. Thousands of people were waiting for us, together with the most famous scientists in Europe. When we four arrived, everyone stood up and cheered. Professor Summerlee began to tell the crowd of our adventures. We spoke about our journey but gave the listeners no idea about where the plateau was or how anyone could get there. He talked about both the wonderful and the terrible things that we found in Maple White Land, the strange plants and animals, and the iguanodons, the pterodactyls, and the other terrible dinosaurs, the Indians and the ape men. Then Dr. Illingworth stood up from the crowd. A year ago, Professor Challengers told us some unusual things. Today, Professor Summerlee is telling us some even more surprising things. But that doesn't tell us that anything of what you say is true. How can we believe these stories? Some listeners shouted loudly at Dr. Illingworth. Others cheered. Then Challenger got up and argued with Illingworth for some time, while the crowd went on shouting and cheering. I have photographs of pterodactyls which will show you without question that, began Challenger. Photographs are not enough, said Illingworth. Then you need to see the real thing? Asked Challenger. Yes, I do, replied Illingworth. And if I can show you the real thing, will you believe us? Without question, laughed Illingworth. Then Challenger put up his hand. I knew what to do. I went out and came back a few seconds later with Zambo and a large square box. The crowd went quiet. Challenger took the top of the box and out came a real, live pterodactyl. Someone screamed, and the pterodactyl opened its great wings and began to fly in small circles around the room. The smell was horrible. More people screamed, and the thing went wild, flying faster and faster. Close the window, roared Challenger, but it was too late. The pterodactyl pushed its great body through the opening and flew away into the night. Challenger fell back into his chair with his head in his hands. Then everyone jumped to their feet. A great crowd of cheering men were around the four of us. Up with them! Shouted 100 voices. A second later, they were carrying us along, high above everybody's heads. The crowd pushed out of the doors. I could not believe the sight which met us in the street. I heard a roar and saw 100,000 people standing there. The crowds carried us along through the centre of London, shouting and cheering all the way. It was midnight when at last they put us down outside Lord John's home. But what about Gladys? As soon as I could, I hurried to her home. I knocked excitedly on her door, heard her voice from inside, pushed past the surprised servant and ran into the sitting room. She was sitting by the window. I flew across the room and took both her hands in my hands. Gladys, I said joyfully, my Gladys. She looked at me very surprised and pulled her hands away. Gladys, what's the matter? I said. You're my Gladys, aren't you, little Gladys Hungerton? No, she replied. I am Gladys Potts. This is my husband. There was a small man with red hair sitting in the corner in a soft chair. My soft chair. I found myself shaking hands with him. I'm sorry, she said, but you went off the other side of the world and left me, so I don't think that you ever loved me very deeply. I turned to the little man. Tell me something. How did you do it? What have you done in your life? Have you been on any adventures? Done anything dangerous? Discovered anything wonderful? Well, no, said the man. I have always worked in a bank. Goodbye, I said, and went off into a night with 1,000 different feelings burning inside me. The next evening, my travelling friends and I all had dinner at Lord John's flat. After dinner, we sat together smoking and talking about our adventures. After a while, Lord John opened a cupboard and took out a small box. Do you remember the place where the pterodactyls lived? He said. Well, I saw something interesting there. It was a hole full of soft blue earth. Now, only ever seen that once before. It was at the great De Beers diamond mine in Australia. So I spent a happy day down at the Petrodactyl's place, and this is what I got. He opened the box. Inside it were 20 or 30 brown stones. I didn't tell you about it at that time because I wasn't sure. So yesterday I took one of them to the finest diamond cutter in London. He took from his pocket a beautiful bright diamond, and this is that stone now. He says that we'll get £200,000 for this lot. That's £50,000 for each of us. Well, what will you do with your 50,000, Challenger? I'll start my own museum. I've always wanted to do that, answered the professor. And you, Summerlee? I'll stop teaching, and then I'll have time to write a book. I'll use my 50,000 to go back and visit the dear old plateau again, said Lord John. And of course you, young man, Malone, will use your money to get married. Not just yet, I said. I think if you will have me, I'd like to go with you. Without a word, Lord John held out a strong brown hand to me across the table. With that, we come to the end of the story. It was a beautiful story where we traveled with these men into wilderness and found a lost world and returned back. I really hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did and loved being on this journey along with me. Please do leave a like and subscribe, and down in the comments below let me know what else would you like me to read to you. Until next time, bye bye, take care.